I'm Vichet Chum, and I'm at Books of Wonder, and I'm debuting my book, Kween. We did it! This is the work of Jen and I. Both of us. Because I've never done anything like this in my life.
No, mostly.
And already, young Khmer girls have already said to me that, and I was back in Lowell recently.
Yeah.
And literally they said to me, you wrote about me.
So much for coming out to Books of Wonder tonight. We are absolutely thrilled to be celebrating the launch of one of the season's most hotly anticipated new debuts. We are celebrating the
AAPAC loves Vichet Chum's Kween!
Vichet Chum, ladies and gentlemen, the man of the hour. Vichet will be joined in conversation tonight by Jen Ung. Jen, I'm going to toss it to you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. By way of introduction, I'm an executive editor at HarperCollins. I'm also the lucky human who had a chance to work with Vichet on his luminous debut novel, Kween. And so I'm going to toss it over to Vichet to please introduce yourself and the book and perhaps read an excerpt.
Yeah, so this is a book called Kween. The protagonist is a young 16-year-old queer Cambodian girl named Soma. Her father's just been recently deported back to Cambodia, and she's recently sort of gotten into spoken word poetry as a means to navigate this new reality for herself. And, you know, it's a coming-of-age story, so she's using this poetry just to find a way to sort of articulate who she thinks she is in real time. And so it's been an incredible labor of love, and, you know, it takes place in Lowell, Massachusetts, which has the second biggest Cambodian population in the country. I myself am not from Lowell, Massachusetts. I'm from Dallas, Texas. But it's Lowell's a different vibe, right? There's this feeling of being in this community where their culture, their language, their way of life is celebrated and reinforced. And, you know, being a guest in that town, I've been there a number of times now. Being a guest in that town, I was just sort of in awe of the way in which not only the Cambodian community, but the other sort of communities coalesce into this really vibrant place. And so I wrote this book, and I'm just gonna read the first sort of poem from the book. And you know, just in dreaming of how I wanted to sort of frame this young woman, you know, I sort of drew from my own sort of personal background, and you know, I was that kid that was writing really angsty poems on my, you know, Trapper Keeper. Thank you. You know, and that is a language that I understand, poetry. I'm a playwright by trade primarily, but I wanted to sort of give her this sort of raucous, riotous voice in which, you know, she is really trying to just find a way to sort of articulate herself boldly. So this is the beginning of the book. Self-view. Set on self-view, like she's even got a clue about that red light flashing hot bright. Counting up the time as she's waiting for that rhyme to find its other pair, like palms kissing for a prayer. Though she's not sure about God, kinda like this tripod. It makes sense on a look, but have you seen it when it's shook? It's supposed to put in place the framework of your face, the depth of your eyes as the words begin to rise. What's she gonna say when she's some kind of way? What's she gonna do after what she's been through? She's not looking for a tear from ye avatars out here. Chick doesn't even know who's hooked onto this flow. But she's out on a limb while things are looking dim, and she needs something to do when her life is feeling new. You see, she's got these yellow-brown blues, these jungle Asian views of not feeling right when you're always in the fight. To prove your worth on this stolen earth, that yours are as equal as the thieving sequel. Settlers, that is, who once made commands and without regard took over these lands and decide who continue to belong as long as the notes are right for their song. Even if you hear sounds of bombs throughout the night, an inherited memory of a shared historical fight to escape the war that just seems to keep going, making it ever so bleak the endeavor of growing. Ooh, she's touched on a nerve. And now she's looking to swerve because she's trying to work through what she knows she cannot undo. The feelings are too hot, even more than she thought, when she put up this phone to speak on the unknown. What she does know is this, that she's looking to not miss. The chance to speak out when she's wanting to shout. Those yellow, brown, blues, those jungle Asian views, a feeling not right when you're always in the fight. And so, the time keeps going, even as her thoughts are slowing. The self-view is waiting for the speaker to keep creating. The red light keeps blinking, and she keeps on thinking about the prayer she is making that will keep her from breaking. What's she gonna say when she's some kind of way? What's she gonna do after what she's been through? Dear self-view, who's even got a clue about that red light flashing hot bright? Woo!
Now I need to kind of like correct myself because that was I've never heard it performed. It's been a minute. So
that is literally what I would do in my room by myself.
Yeah.
Like I tried to speak out the entire book by myself.
It's gorgeous. So you talked a bit about Lowell already, and so I wanted to sort of ask what else inspired you to write this book, and what did that process look like?
Yeah, so very practically, I got a new play commission from Merrimack Repertory Theatre, which is in Lowell, Massachusetts. I had done my solo show there back in 2018. It was a solo play that I also performed in, and it was about sort of my navigating this inheritance of survival and certainly genocide, but mostly survival. That was my first sort of entry into this town, and it was deeply meaningful. I'm just like looking around all these faces, and I'm just like so deeply moved that you're all here. Anyways, sorry, distracted. I was just deeply moved by the community and so inspired by the community. And what I will say, being in that town, it's like you watch these young Khmer kids, these Cambodian kids, and these kids of color sort of walk around town with this kind of self-possession, this like confidence, this swagger that like I did not have as a child. And I grew up in Texas, so it was a much more homogenous environment, and everything about the early aughts was about like try to fit in, try to fade out into the background. And so, being in Lowell, I was just like in awe of these Khmer kids just like, walking with their heads high, and so, fast forward to me writing this new play commission, I was like, that's what I want to do. I want to frame a story in which a Khmer kid is the protagonist, because I myself never had that as a young person. And a young queer Cambodian girl, I wanted her to be the protagonist. And so I wrote this play, and we did like 2 virtual workshops in the pandemic, and that was lovely, and I was still dreaming on it. And then my lovely friend, Jen and she's the bomb, she saw one of the virtual presentations, and she was like, I think this could be a book. And so with her encouragement and with her just kindness and compassion, she was like, let's just work on a proposal, and we'll work on 50 pages, and we'll work on a synopsis and a character sort of breakdown. And then I worked on it, and we submitted it, and they liked it, which was cool.
They loved it.
And then I got to writing, and it's been a really moving journey. It's been a hard journey. I never thought I could write 70,000 words. But I think, what felt quite constant for me and felt like a compass for me was this protagonist, this young woman who, was dealing with really big things that are completely out of her control, and she is finding art as a means to really combat that, to understand that, to find herself in the middle of all that, and so she is my inspiration, and it's been crazy, we pre-released the book in Lowell this last weekend, and we gave out a couple of free books, and it was, no one's really read it yet, but as I was sort of offering the synopsis of what the book was about, these young Khmer kids, and particularly one specific young woman came up to me after a conversation, and she, sorry, let me take a step back. Part of the plot is that she has entered this lit poetry contest. It's sort of based on the hometown hero of Lowell, Massachusetts, Jack Kerouac. He's from that town, and so they have an annual poetry contest every year. And so, she is sort of seeing that legacy, and she's stepping into that legacy, and she is sort of like making herself iconic, and so this young woman, after one of our conversations, she's a Khmer girl, she came up to me and she was like, I enter the contest every year, I perform in the contest every year, you wrote my story, how did you write my story? And I was like, oh. And I immediately gave her a book because I was like, this is yours, this is like you, and like tell me how it is and then write a better book, because she and so many young Khmer youths are my inspiration for the book.
Absolutely. I think there's a line that's like probably later on where Soma says that she feels like the dead follows her everywhere. And that's something that I feel is like so baked into being Khmer that like to see that on a page was so moving. But also she's like smoking weed in the park with her friends, right? Yes. And so like that juxtaposition felt so deeply moving to me that it's not just like Cambodians are not just this like perfect portrait of like a victim or like a like trauma survivor, but they're also just sort of like normal people doing shit.
Right,
so,
right, totally.
Yeah, well, it's, keeping the train on joy, like I appreciate how a big fat Khmer wedding features prominently in the book, and having had my own big fat Khmer ceremony a few years ago, I found this chaotic portrayal very relatable and hilarious, and I wondered if you could talk about your process for imagining this piece of the story and how you envision these sort of like cultural touch marks interacting with Soma's overall growth. So
another primary plot point in the book is she has an older sister who is much older than her. She herself is 16 and her older sister is in her 30s. And her older sister is about to get married, but also the mother has recently traveled to Cambodia to make sure their father is okay. And so it's the two girls during the course of this book. And so the older sister is about to get married, and I mean, if you're Cambodian, you will understand this. Cambodian weddings are chaos. It's
zero organization.
There's zero organization. It's a lot of aunties just like pushing you and like poking at you and yelling at you for not doing that thing, and you're like, I didn't know I was supposed to do that thing. And
what was it? Was it the lychee that you got like in trouble for?
Oh, I got in trouble for everything. Yeah, no. And most recently, for one of my younger cousins, she didn't have a lot of money, so she asked me she asked my brother and I if we would consider being her wedding planner, which like, we were like, sure, we love you, you're like a younger sister, and so like, we'll do anything, but like, we hadn't realized like how little she had done. Like she didn't have a guest list. We were like, who do you want to come? And she was like, I don't know, I thought my mom would just handle that. And I was like, yes, but you also have to make these decisions as well. And I think we like sent out invitations like 2 weeks before the wedding. It was a mess. And also I was just like, oh my gosh, like every wedding needs a stage manager. Like every wedding needs a stage manager. Anyway, so I have always felt that like weddings, Cambodian weddings are, and probably in other cultures as well, like such great, it is like the epitome, like the avatar of what it is to be a Cambodian person in the world. Because it is both sort of brimming with dignity and royalty. I mean, the outfits are just out of control. I mean, everyone's like in these big like bouffant things and like wraps and so much gold.
Yeah.
Everything's laced in gold. And their bangles and chains and swords. Like it's like trying to emulate something quite royal and our ancestors, you know, where we've come from. And so there's that, and then this sort of like, we're making it up, you know, sort of like in real time. We haven't really planned this out, but we love each other. We think we love each other. And so, you know, that sort of dissonance was something that to me just does feel uniquely Cambodian. And so I really wanted to incorporate that into this book. And it also, you know, it's making art, right? A wedding is making art in some capacity, and the stakes are quite high, you know what I mean? Like, and so I wanted to sort of culminate the book in this like gesture of these two sisters having to sort of really come together as their parents are gone overseas in Cambodia. The two sisters have to really come together to find out how they can best sort of embody this event, and, you know, give this, you know, event for the older sister and make sure that she herself feels, you know, supported and held by the community as she's sort of entering this new stage in her life. And so it's like, it will be a mess when you read it. Like, it's a mess in there. Like, it's chaotic, but it is also a very authentic, I think, representation of what it is to be in a Khmer wedding.
Yeah, and also undersells how much he helped his cousin on this wedding, because as soon as he told me he did that, I was like, please send me all of your documents. I'm planning my own wedding. Legit, it's like 8:05. That and Yay will line up. You know, like it was legit so impressive, and we used all of the materials and just adapted it for ourselves.
My boyfriend is actually a stage manager.
I know, yeah,
so
exactly.
he was like, do this, and I was like, gotcha. Yeah.
Like, also the English translations of what the ceremonies meant, like trying to pull that out of our parents was like pulling teeth, where they're like, I don't know, you just put the candle in the thing, and like you, and I'm like, no, but like people want to know what the meaning is behind it. And like, it's just interesting how, you know, through migration and trauma and all these things, traditions morph into something that's like entirely different from what you would probably see in Cambodia.
Well, and I also then became the MC of the wedding.
Yes, I remember.
The English-speaking Chang, and that was hilarious.
Yeah.
I was both like, okay, here I go. I'm going to use that MFA in acting right now for all these people who are pushing me around and making me mad.
Yeah.
But it was, but then also, you know, there were moments where it's like when it got quiet and we saw, you know, the beautiful bride and groom sort of walk around the room with the golden sword, and it got really quiet. It's like, oh God, this is where I've come from, you know. So,
there's always that moment where you just feel like, wow, this is like so much bigger than me.
Of course.
Even though there's like this sort of like on the ground chaos, and so. Anyway, thank you again for those instructions. It was very helpful in 2018.
Anytime I should start a business.
Yeah, absolutely. So in the book, Soma navigates an issue that'll be familiar with many children of immigrants, which is this question of how much of her parents' story is hers to claim. And with parents who carry a weight as heavy as surviving a genocide, I think it's particularly hard to occupy sort of this in-between space of feeling grief for something you've never experienced, but also feeling really weighed down by it. And I've noticed that you explore this a lot through much of your work, not just this book, but just many of the plays that you've done. And I just wanted to ask, like, what is it about this question of ownership over history that, like, calls to you enough for it to sort of recur so often in your work?
I mean, that question feels quite prescient, you know, regardless of who you are, right? And I think that's the tension that America is dealing with right now in real time, and because some people don't feel connected to their history in whatever way, or their history is quite complex, and so I have always felt my history like front row seat, because, you know, my family are vessels of that history, and we were navigating it in real time as young people, trying to figure out, like, what does this mean that this food smells a certain way, or like, what does it mean when my mom spanks me, or what does this mean when I can't communicate with my parents, and so I was very sort of, I've always been aware of my history in some way, and yes, the tragic parts as well. I mean, certainly my folks didn't talk about what happened to them, and they are survivors of the genocide. But it took growing up into my own, autonomous person and being curious and asking them questions about what they really went through, in which I could then sort of, feel like I had a bridge to that history, and I could really wrap my brain and my heart around all of that, and yeah, so I it's just something I'm obsessed with, dramatically. I'm obsessed with the ways in which we inherit history in intentional ways or unintentional ways. I'm obsessed with the way in which history moves through generations and how it manifests in a myriad of ways. I'm obsessed with, how we can build bridges through generations and cultures, versus sort of remaining in our silos and our, our own, bubbles or whatever. All of my plays and my work, I desire them to be spaces of empathy, spaces for healing in some way. And that's not like healing with a capital H, to me, like, healing looks like many different things. And so, I want to continue to sort of, if I'm going to construct ecosystems, if I'm going to construct worlds, if I'm going to gather people around a story, I want to make sure that, specifically for Cambodian people, that yes, we are healing and that we're moving forward, and then also that we are constantly in conversation with our histories, and we're trying to figure out how to be better. Isn't that like the existential stuff? Like, we're hopefully trying to be better, and we're trying to sort of rewrite the wrongs of history and create a better place than from which we left.
Yeah, it's a means for Soma to search for deeper answers about her emotions, but it's also a vessel for her to share those thoughts with others. How much of yourself and your experiences as an artist informed this portrayal?
Yeah, so I was that kid who wrote all of his poetry on my Trapper Keeper, and I've unearthed them recently, and I'm like, oh my god, this kid was really sad. But I'm judging myself, but also I was just a young person trying to find a way to articulate my thoughts, and particularly, I tell people that growing up, we did not talk at the dinner table. It was a very silent household, unless we got in trouble or were being yelled at or whatever. And so we were sort of, left to our own devices, and certainly poetry and language was something that I sort of tapped into pretty early on. I even remember going on to poetry.com and submitting a poem, and then they're like, for $19.99, you can get it on a plaque, and I was like, did I win something? I did not win anything. So I think, writing and language and poetry has always been really intuitive to me as a person, and what I love about, I then went into acting and theater and writing plays, because I love working in the theater. I love working in spaces with other people. I love collaborating with people who are smarter than me. And so I sort of, put aside the writing for a bit, but then I sort of came back to it intuitively in graduate school. I was grateful for my graduate school experience because I was taking directing and playwriting while also being an actor primarily. I was cultivating those interests, and I was, writing a ton in grad school. And then, when I moved to New York as an actor, I was writing all the while. And so this became a Wikipedia entry about writing, but no, it's, so writing has always stayed with me, and it's always been the way in which I can express the most authentic version of myself. And I know what power that has had on my life, having the opportunity to make worlds out of nothing. And so for this book, she's like in a really tough situation, and she is a young person, and she is looking at a wall. Her father may not ever come back, and she is trying to create a future out of impossibility. And so with that, it felt quite intuitive again to sort of give her this sort of vocabulary in which she could really draw her strength from. I mean, most of the time in the book, throughout the book, she's just like, I don't know, she asks a lot of questions, she's unsure of what's going on, she's falling in love, she's really navigating what I think a lot of young people do. And then, that is juxtaposed with these sort of like siloed passages of her just sort of expressing herself. And you sort of get to see both her interiority and her exteriority, the way in which she engages with people, and then the way in which she's by herself, and like the power of like saying the thing you want to say without it being edited by anybody, without having an audience for it. She is just at the center of herself. And that felt so important for me to do, to give her a space throughout this story in which no one could judge her. She was unto herself, and she was at the center of her words.
Yeah. And pivoting to sort of like industry talk, this is your debut novel, and I was curious which parts of the publishing process you found most rewarding and which ones surprised you.
It's like, can we talk about like writing the book too?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Like, it's hard writing a book. Luckily I had the play, like a draft of the play, so I had already made so many choices, and so I had scaffolding from which I could sort of draw from. And then literally you encouraged me to like, it can be dialogue heavy. Like literally you can just take all the dialogue and you can just put it into your Word document and then just keep writing more. And so I think I was just really intimidated by the real estate of it all, like how somebody 1,000 words is like abstract, and then you do it and you're like, oh my God, it's a lot. And that felt quite challenging. I really, like you kept giving me notes like, write more, or just like describe that more. What does she sound like? Like, what is she wearing? Like, what does it smell like in that room? And all the things that I learned as a playwright, just generally speaking, playwriting is all about like the economy of action, economy of language. Like you have to figure out the most essential version of this story. And that might be true for a book as well. It is true for a book, but you just have so much more space to find that. And so, it felt, writing this book kind of like I tapped into how it felt like being 16 years old and in English class and having like a creative writing exercise. And, that felt cool. Like it felt, I was quite nostalgic in the process of writing this book. And so, it was challenging. It was certainly challenging and surprising. And then I think in terms of like industry stuff, I guess like working in the American theater is challenging, and also you realize that your impact can be sometimes quite localized, and it's supposed to be in some way. It's ephemeral. It happens in real time and then it goes away, and you sort of like come to terms with that. And this is in print, and this is permanent, and
it's distributed nationwide.
And that's intimidating, I think with plays, it's like, because it's so ephemeral, it's sort of like, well, I'll get it, I'll fix it later, or maybe an actor will be much better of a collaborator than I am, like they'll figure it out for me. And this, it was like, it's locked in, and I had to sort of trust former versions of myself while writing this book, that I had to trust the version of myself like 7 months ago who wrote that one chapter that he has completely forgotten about, And so that's both intimidating but also quite freeing as well, because look, you just can't control the way people receive this thing, you know? You sort of have to put trust into it and hope that they can read my good intention and my goodwill. And I think, you know, what is surprising is that, you know, we sent out some advanced reader copies months ago, and so a couple people have read the book, and just even like when we released the cover art of the book, which was such a cool process because Jen has been amazing and she really gave me so much consultation, but also like a lot of like encouragement to do what I wanted to do. And so one of the first things I thought was like, I want to make sure that a young Cambodian person looks at this cover immediately and is like, that's me, that's it, like that, like I want to read that book. And so I touched on making sure that it was a photo first. I wanted it to be a young Cambodian girl. And then we got this Cambodian photographer, and this model is a young Cambodian girl named Tatiana So. And you know, we got to really collaborate on making sure that whatever image we were putting out there felt quite informed of not only the way in which a reader was going to receive the book, but in the way in which the story is. You know, she's Soma. I mean, I can't even tell you how much of Soma she is. When we first met her, we were both sort of floored by the way in which like all the pieces were coalescing, and it felt so perfect. And so I guess I was really surprised by how all that went down, and how also when we released the image, I was getting a lot of DMs and messages from people in the Khmer community who were like, whoa, like what? Like you're doing that? Like I've never seen a Cambodian person on a book cover before, or a Southeast Asian or a darker Asian person on a book cover before, and that feels, you know, surprising, and also, of course, like how incredible is that?
Yeah, and I mean, just to speak to the cover process a bit more, like we interviewed a few different models for this. It was me, the art director, and Mel Chang, who's an amazing photographer based in Boston. And every single model we spoke to, I think we were just like crying on every Zoom meeting, because every single person was like, I don't even care if I get picked. This is such a meaningful project. And I realized that like any Cambodian person in a creative field carries this sort of like weight and responsibility, because our people survived a genocide in which the artists were one of the first people to be persecuted, and like, so in a lot of ways we're kind of like remaking what art can be and can look like for the diaspora, and I think that definitely came through.
So yes, part of our history as Cambodian people is that, you know, very vaguely we are told that the first monarch of Cambodia is a woman named Soma, who was the monarch of the Funan kingdom. You know, I was like, oh, like that's got to be the name of the protagonist, because she has to feel sort of the legacy of her history that she is discovering in real time, but she has come from royal people. And so I was like, well, maybe Kween feels quite intuitive. She herself is a queen. I think of her, Soma, as a queen. And then I just like made it gay, you know what I mean? And that feels important to me too, because she's at the axis of these two identities that she's navigating, and trying to figure out how they relate, how they're different, how they work in tandem with one another. And so, Kween, and it's crazy because, you know, the designer, you know, was able to sort of design it in such a way that it looks like a crown on the cover, which I was just like, oh God, this is why you like work with really good, brilliant people who know what they're doing.
She agonized over that bottom rung of the first E. Like, should it be propped up? Should it be propped down? Like, she really like spent a lot of thought goes into sort of like even a detail as small as that.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I think also just like the name and the spelling, it's like, this is the juxtaposition. This is the, she comes from royalty, but she herself is a 16-year-old girl who's living in a queer world. So that also holds that sort of dissonance as well.
Any other questions? Sure.
Hi, Vichet.
Hi.
Why did you choose to feature a girl instead of a boy when you started thinking about this?
Yeah. I mean, I take this very seriously, just in relationship to myself also as a playwright. I do believe you can write out of your social location, but I think if you're going to do it, it has to be done with a lot of intentionality and a lot of research and a lot of thoughtfulness. And for me, it's like I have written about gay Cambodian dudes. You know what I mean? Like, that is very intuitive to me, and that feels like I already have a multitude of stories that feature them as main characters. And so, to me, I really wanted to frame this young woman and quite honestly, she sort of is also inspired by my younger cousin, who's very much a Gen Zer, and it was the first person who showed me what TikTok was, and the first person who wanted me to do like a weird dance with her, and I was like, I don't know how to do that. But so, she, to me, it's like, I have been the main, even though, it's been hard in terms of my journey of being a queer, gay, Asian dude. I feel like we're still fighting for representation, and we're still fighting to be the main character of the story. But the other part of doing art, making art, writing stories is the opportunity to expand the space, to make sure that you're not just writing for yourself, that you're also writing for other people who deserve to have their story be told in some way. And so, I just wanted to expand the space a little bit and make sure that, like, a young Cambodian girl was getting the opportunity to have people witness her in her complexity. Everyone's had a journey, but I've had a challenging journey. I didn't come out until I turned 30. And so it's been a buzzword journey. It's been a journey. I'm just like sort of going through all the nuances of your question, because I'm deeply moved by what you've shared. But I think for me, my parents were just, and I'm sure some of you might connect with this, but my parents were just concerned with us surviving. They were concerned with us making sure that we had food to eat and making sure that we had clothes on our backs. And I think that there wasn't a lot of invested interest in what we were specifically doing. I will say my mom always said to me, all I want to make sure is that you're not in a gang. Like, literally, it's like the most Cambodian mother thing one could say. But that was my experience. They were just working so hard. Like, my first memory of my parents were that they were tired all the time. And man, this question is like putting me down like a very emotional rabbit hole. And so, they were very concerned about making sure that we had resources and that we were fine. But I think that we were sort of left to our own devices. And the one rule was that it just, whatever extracurricular that we got involved to, it had to not cost money. You know what I mean? Because we didn't have a lot of money. And so, theater felt like a really easy pathway, and also like became this sort of like space in which we could, articulate ourselves. And so we just kept doing that, and my parents were like, it's a hobby, it's fine. And then, as I sort of went to school for it, and as I, both undergrad and graduate school, I had to have a little bit more of formal conversations with them about like what that meant. And I think they were deeply skeptical. I still heard the aria of like, you need to like make money, you need to make sure that you're fine. And so I think then, just professionally, I sort of, in my post, arts education, I had to really sort of let them in to what I was doing, which was not easy for me because I was also deeply guarded because of being still in the closet and whatnot, and so if I ever write a memoir, it will be called Late Bloomer, because so much of my radical transformation has really happened in the last decade, and I think letting my folks into my world both personally and also through my art, they were able to sort of understand and to see what I was actually trying to do, that it wasn't a hobby, that it was something I took quite seriously, and also that I was concerned about framing their stories, that I was concerned about making sure I made good on their legacy in some way. And I think as a young person, you're so sort of protected and guarded because you always feel judged in some way. And I think that something I tell young people now is you have to have healthy boundaries, and then also leave space for transformation in some way. And that is something that when I look back on my relationship with my folks, that's the journey we took. And now my parents are benefiting from their gay sons taking them to Europe. You know what I mean? Which is great, for them. But it's they've gone on 2 in the last 2 years. They're fine. But no, I mean it's I take that very seriously, and the fact that you have a queer kid, Khmer kid, it's I hope that they get to find themselves in this book, or they feel something in this book that connects with them emotionally, because I wrote that for your child.
And before we pass it over to the wonderful Books of Wonder folks for logistics, I just want to say, please support this bookstore. I worked here when I was in college 13 years ago, and so it feels hugely meaningful to kind of be in this space in this capacity. It's where I learned my love of kids' books. They've got the best selection in the city, arguably the nation, so please support them. And let's give another round of applause for Vichet.